Our topic for today is rationalism. I want to talk about the rationalist tradition. It stems in Western philosophy all the way from Plato, up through figures like Descartes and Leibniz, to many contemporary philosophers. What is rationalism? Well, roughly speaking, it's the idea that not all of our knowledge of the world comes from experience. Some of it is inborn in us. Some of it we can recover through a process of something like something like meditation or reflection, rational reflection on the structure of our own minds, the structure of thought, something that is independent of anything that's coming to us from the senses. Let's try to be more precise. I think we can distinguish two theses that make up a traditional rationalist perspective. The first is what we could call concept rationalism. It's the view that not all of our concepts come from experience. Some are innate. Traditionally, this is known as the doctrine of innate ideas. We have some concepts that are inborn in us, that are part of our equipment as human beings. Now that might sound strange. What do you mean we have concepts that are built into us, that we're born with? Well, that's precisely the thesis. The idea is that our minds come with a certain kind of structure to them, and that structure gives us certain kinds of cognitive abilities. Now, some of those cognitive abilities are what we can call higher order cognitive abilities, things that empiricists recognize too as part of our inborn equipment. Things like the ability to abstract ideas from other ideas, or combine ideas, or perhaps perform logical operations on ideas, negating them, for example, or doing other kinds of things that would relate ideas to one another. But suppose we had some inborn first-order cognitive abilities, things that are something like recognitional capacities. There are certain things in the world we can recognize from the moment of our birth. We don't have to learn to recognize them. A classic example from Leibniz is pain or pleasure. The baby comes out of the womb and gets a spank to start it breathing, and immediately has a sensation of pain. It doesn't have to learn what pain is, it knows how to recognize pain. It has, if you will, a concept of pain already. Well, pain you might think of as an internal state of mind, so the empiricist isn't going to immediately roll over and say, "You got me." But what about other things in the world? What about causation? Is causation the kind of thing that we have to learn to uncover in the world? Or is it something we're built to uncover? There's been a lot of research on children and the way these concepts develop. But somewhere between 6 and 9 months of age, typically, a child begins to recognize the identity of objects, begins to recognize causal relations among things. When things have a normal pattern and things retain their identity, the child gets bored quickly. When they suddenly change, the child looks and pays close attention, realizing something weird is going on. There's some expectation that is being defeated. So the child, somewhere between 6 and 9 months, has the concept of causation, can recognize causal relations in the world, can recognize continuing objects or substances in the world. Is that a capacity that the child is born with, but has to develop and eventually develops and gets activated between 6 and 9 months of age? Or is that the kind of thing the child is inferring from experience, the way an empiricist would insist? This is still very much a live issue in cognitive psychology. It's also a live issue in linguistics. You might think that there are certain structures, linguistic structures, built into the brain. Things like a basic subject-predicate form of thinking, of sentences, that it really is there from birth. It's something that we don't have to learn by listening to languages. It's something that is already there to be activated. The most famous advocate of that view is Noam Chomsky, who says there is simply not enough data that the child has in order to formulate the rules of the grammar of their own language. They learn their language partly because the rules are already built into the mind. Not the rules of that specific language, of course, not specifically of English or Arabic or Chinese or some other specific language, but a kind of universal grammar, he says, is built into the mind. So that too is very much a live issue in linguistics. In any case, the first thesis then of the rationalist is concept rationalism, the idea that we do have innate ideas, innate concepts. To put it more precisely, that we have first-order cognitive abilities that are there from birth. The second thesis is what we might call the thesis of judgment rationalism. That's the view that there are synthetic a priori truths. They're synthetic because they give us information about the world. They're not merely verbal truths. They're not things like bachelors are unmarried or a soul is a soul or something else that Locke could dismiss as a trifling proposition. They're things that really do tell us something about the world. But on the other hand, they are a priori. They don't come from experience. In fact, we could know them independently of experience, just through rational reflection alone. There have been many candidates for synthetic a priori truths proposed by various rationalists. Sometimes it's things like the part is smaller than the whole. An empiricist is going to say that's just stemming from the definitions of part and whole. Some have been truths of mathematics, things like 7 plus 5 is 12. That's an example from Immanuel Kant. Many philosophers, including some in the rationalist tradition like Descartes, would say, no, that's really analytic. That's something that follows from logic and the definitions of terms. But Kant's reasoning was something like this. We have to recognize the unit of 5, the unit of 7, and then recognize that we can put those together to get something that constitutes a new number. He thought that act, what we today describe as something like the sum set axiom in set theory, the idea that the union of any two sets is a set, that, he thought, had to be a synthetic truth. That couldn't follow simply from the meanings of set and union. Now, he didn't express it in terms of set theory, but I think that's a fair reconstruction of his argument. Well, whatever you think about mathematics, and again, this is a lively issue in the philosophy of mathematics, it's unclear how far an attempt to reduce mathematics to logic, in the way that Bertrand Russell, Alfred North Whitehead, and other logicists tried to do, can succeed. For a while, that seemed like a very promising program. Then it was widely thought that Gödel's theorem defeated it. But now, there are a variety of people who have tried to resurrect a sort of neo-logicist approach to the philosophy of mathematics. So that, too, remains a live issue. Do we have to approach it as a rationalist would, saying that it's through rational reflection that we derive certain basic axioms like the axioms of set theory? The problem, in a certain sense, with logicism or neo-logicism, I think, is not lying in some technical result, but rather in the fact that the logic you have to assume is so powerful that it feels like it's amounting to a theory of sets or properties or categories or something like that anyway. And so it's not clear that one has really made much of a philosophical gain. But there are many other examples. Things like you can't change the past. Or, to take some I've talked about in another video, nothing can be entirely red and entirely green at the same time. These are things that we might think of and say, yes, that seems true, but does it follow from the meanings of the terms? Well, not in any obvious way. And so those are candidates for the rationalist mill. Whatever you think of any particular examples, the judgment rationalists insist that there are truths about the world. They're synthetic. They really give us information about the world, not just about logic or language. But they also are a priori. They are independent of experience. We can get them by reflecting on the structure of thinking, on the structure of the mind itself, apart from any information we receive from the senses. So let's sum up. The rationalist position amounts to two claims. First, the claim of concept rationalism. There are concepts, first-order cognitive abilities, that we are born with. We are born with the capacity for recognizing certain things in the world. Things like pleasure and pain, yes, but also, perhaps, things like objects, things like causal relationships, and a variety of other things. Secondly, the thesis of judgment rationalism, which is that there are synthetic a priori truths, truths that we can know independently of experience, but nevertheless give us real information about the world.